What do you do when the people you count on most treat you like an ATM? Honestly, what would you do if your dad threw a glass of wine in your face and told you to pay off your brother's debt? Would you swallow it and stay silent? Or finally tell them where to go? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm Gianna. I'm 32, I live in Boise, and I work as a financial analyst. I wish I could say this was just a bad joke at Thanksgiving dinner, but no. My parents, Kendall and John, decided to hand me a gift. Not pie, not a card, but a notice that my brother Liam owes $250,000 because his business tanked. My dad shoved the paper at me and told me I was going to pay it. I told him no. He didn't argue, he just hurled his wine at me, red all over my shirt, down my face. My mom screamed at me to leave. I stood there, heart pounding, wine everywhere, wondering how this is supposed to be my family. Just a week before, I had my backpack out, rolling up sleeping bags, counting down the days to a camping trip in Sawtooth with some friends. I like my life in Boise. I worked like hell to get here. I own a tiny apartment with creaky hardwood, a giant window, just enough space to breathe. I make good money, $180,000 a year, and I earned every bit of it. And I'm not alone. My Akita, Kenshin, follows me from room to room. People cross the street when they see him. Snow-white fur, almost wolf-like, but really he's a big softie. Kenshin stays close and listens, almost like he knows when I need him. Sawtooth was going to be my escape. Some time with friends, hiking, zero pressure. I already told Isaac and Craig I was in. Then my mom's text buzzed in. "Come to Idaho Falls for Thanksgiving. We miss you." I just stared at it. I hadn't visited home in 2 years. The last trip, Liam played the hero again, while the rest of us just played along. He's always been the favorite. Football star, life of the party, their golden child. I was the quiet one in the background, hustling through homework and counting pennies from my summer jobs. "You're so responsible," Mom would sigh. But it wasn't a compliment. It meant I could carry more. And they expected me to. I called my friend to cancel. "You're ditching us for your family?" he teased. "They don't deserve you, Gianna." I laughed it off, but his words stung. Still, I told myself this could be a chance to reconnect. I texted Mom back. "I'll be there. I'm bringing Kenshin." She sent a heart emoji, and for a second I felt a flicker of warmth. But as I unpacked my camping gear, doubts crept in. Why now? They hadn't called in months. I started packing for the 3-hour drive to Idaho Falls. Kenshin stood by the door, his white tail still, his dark eyes watching me with a strange intensity. He usually loved car rides, but today he looked like he was standing guard against something I couldn't yet see. I'm curious, what would you have done in that moment at the table, and where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and subscribe to see how I handle the fallout. I picked out a nice sweater, something presentable but not too fancy. I wanted to show up as myself, not the perfect daughter they sometimes expected. But as I folded my clothes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Mom's text was too short, too formal, like it was rehearsed. Beside me, Kenshin was unusually silent. Usually, the jingle of car keys meant the big white Akita would be spinning in circles, but today he just sat by the trunk, his dark eyes watching the driveway. He jumped into the back of the SUV with a heavy thud, his gaze fixed on me through the rearview mirror as we started the 3-hour drive to Idaho Falls. I stopped in front of my parents' house, my heart racing. The late November air was crisp, but I barely noticed. I grabbed the gift bags, wine for Dad, a silk scarf for Mom, and a finance book for my sister-in-law, Danielle. I'd spent hours picking them out, wanting to show I cared, even if I wasn't sure and they did. As I walked up the porch steps, the front door swung open and Dad wrapped his arms around me in a tight hug. "You made it," he said. His voice was warm but louder than I remembered. Mom appeared behind him, taking my coat with a smile that felt a little too wide. "It's been too long," she said, guiding me inside. Kenshin followed me in, his massive white paws clicking softly on the hardwood. He didn't do his usual happy dance. Instead, he stayed glued to my hip, his nose twitching as he scanned the room. When he saw my brother Liam and Danielle standing by the fireplace, a low, almost imperceptible rumble started in his chest. Liam flashed his usual charming grin. "Hey, sis," he said, clapping my shoulder like we were old buddies. Danielle nodded, her smile polite but distant. I handed out the gifts. Dad admired the wine. Mom wrapped the scarf. Danielle flipped through the book with a quick thanks. It felt rehearsed. We sat down to dinner. The table was set with Mom's best dishes: golden turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans. For a moment, I let myself believe we could have us again. I took a sip of wine, trying to relax, but my stomach twisted. Their smiles were too bright, their questions too eager. Mom asked about my job, my apartment, my savings, things she never cared about before. "You're doing so well," she said, her tone almost probing. Dad followed up quickly. "You must have a nice nest egg by now." Liam dominated the conversation, bragging about his latest real estate deal. "It's a game changer," he said, leaning back. Danielle chimed in, praising his ambition, but her eyes kept darting at me. I remembered the last time I saw him, how he'd hinted at money troubles. Now his confidence felt forced. Kenshin stayed under the table, resting his heavy white head on my foot. He didn't touch the scraps Liam tried to toss him. He just stayed there, a constant, warm reminder that I wasn't alone. Whatever they wanted, it wasn't just a Thanksgiving dinner. Their laughter, their questions, their glances, it all felt like a setup. $250,000 gift. After dinner, we moved to the living room for the gift exchange. The fireplace crackled, casting a warm glow, but the air felt heavy, like the tension from the table had followed us. Mom handed out the presents I'd brought: Dad's wine, her scarf, Danielle's finance book, and they smiled, thanking me again, but their voices sounded rehearsed. My brother Liam leaned back on the couch, his arm around his wife, watching me with a look I couldn't quite read. Beside my chair, Kenshin sat tall, his white fur gleaming in the firelight. He didn't relax or lie down. His dark eyes moved from Liam to Danielle, his ears twitching at every small movement they made. He was on high alert. His protective instinct hummed through the floorboards. "Your turn," Mom said, her smile tight as she handed me a small, neatly wrapped box. I took it, expecting something simple, a trinket, maybe a family keepsake. My fingers fumbled with the ribbon, and I forced a smile, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. Inside the box was a single folded paper. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the text, and my heart stopped. It was a bank notice, official and cold, stating my brother Liam owed $250,000 for a failed startup. I stared at the numbers, my mind racing to make sense of it. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low, looking up at Mom. She glanced at Dad, who cleared his throat and leaned forward, his hands clasped. "It's your brother's debt," Dad said, his tone firm, like he was stating a fact I should already accept. "The business didn't work out. We need you to cover it." I blinked, the paper trembling in my hands. Liam's eyes were on me, unblinking, his grin gone. Danielle shifted closer to him, her face calm but expectant. "You're doing so well, Giona," Mom said, her voice soft but sharp, like she was trying to soothe me into agreement. "You've always been the responsible one. This is for the family." I looked at her, then at Dad, then at Liam, waiting for someone to say this was a mistake. No one did. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, like I was being cornered. Beside me, Kenshin let out a loud, vibrating growl, barely audible to them, but I felt it against my leg. He knew I was in trouble. "How do you even know I can pay this?" I asked, my voice sharper now. Danielle spoke up, her tone matter-of-fact. "I work at the bank, Gianna. I saw your savings. $700,000. You can afford it." My stomach dropped. She'd accessed my account, my private finances, without my permission. The violation hit me like a punch. I'd spent years building that safety net, working late nights, skipping vacations, while Liam spent money on whatever he wanted, and now they were using my hard work against me, like it was theirs to claim. "This isn't fair," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Why is this my problem?" Liam finally spoke, his voice smooth but edged with frustration. "Come on, sis, it's just money. We're family. You can't let us lose everything." His words stung, not because they were true, but because they weren't. Family didn't mean this, lying, scheming, digging into my life like I owed them. I looked at the bank notice again, the words "failed startup" glaring at me. I didn't believe it. My brother's history of bad deals and flashy purchases flashed through my mind. Dad leaned closer, his face hardening. "You've got the means. You're sitting on all that money, and you're going to let your brother's life fall apart. What kind of daughter does that?" His words cut deep, but not because I felt guilty. They confirmed what I'd always feared. They didn't see me as their daughter. The room went silent. My brother Liam's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing like I'd betrayed him. Danielle's calm mask slipped. Mom's face fell, replaced by a sharp, cold desperation. I could feel their disappointment pressing down on me, but I held my ground. "You're being selfish," Danielle said, her voice a low hiss. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her she had no right to my money or my life, but I didn't. I just stared back, my heart pounding. They'd planned this, all of them, before I even walked through the door. The warm welcome, the dinner, the smiles, it was all a trap. I pushed the box away. "I'm not paying his debt," I said, staring at Dad, daring him to argue. His face twisted, a flush creeping up his neck. Liam shot forward. "You're really going to let us lose everything?" he snapped, his charm gone, replaced by a raw edge of desperation. "This is his mess," I said, pointing at Liam. "Why am I the one who has to clean it up?" The silence that followed was heavy. Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping the floor with a screech that made Kenshin snap his head up. Dad grabbed his wineglass, his knuckles white around the stem. "You ungrateful child," he spat. Before I could move, he flung the red wine at me. It splashed across my face, cold and sharp, stinging my eyes and soaking my white sweater. The liquid dripped down my chin, pooling on the floor. I stood, frozen. My own father had done this, without a hint of regret. Mom stood, her voice icy. "If you won't help your brother, you're not welcome here. Get out." I wiped the wine from my eyes, my sleeve now stained red. Kenshin stood up then, a low, guttural growl vibrating through his massive chest. He stepped between me and Dad, his white fur bristling, his teeth bare just enough to show he was done playing nice. "You're choosing him over me," I said, my voice low but steady. "After everything I've done, this is how you treat me?" I grabbed my coat, my movements sharp. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to guilt me into fixing his mistakes." I walked toward the door, my wet shirt clinging to my skin, the smell of wine sharp in my nose. Kenshin walked beside me, his shoulder pressed against my leg, guarding my exit. Mom stood rigid, her eyes cold, like I was a stranger.
I stepped outside into the November air. It hit my wet clothes, chilling me to the bone, but I didn't stop. I wasn't their scapegoat anymore. The front door slammed behind me, the sound echoing through the cold Idaho air. Inside the house, a suffocating silence fell over the living room. My father, John, stood with his chest heaving, his hand still shaking from the force of throwing the wine. Mom remained rigid, her eyes fixed on the door as if making sure I wouldn't dare come back. Liam and Danielle exchanged a quick, relieved look, thinking they had finally won. But they forgot one person. Arthur rose to his feet from the darkened corner of the room. He hadn't touched his dinner, and he hadn't said a word until now. His presence, usually quiet and gentle, suddenly filled every inch of the space. His grip tightened on his cane as he stared at Dad. "I've had enough," Arthur said. His voice was low, but it sliced through the room like a blade. Dad turned, his face still flushed with rage. "Stay out of this, Arthur. Gianna is being selfish. She's letting her brother lose everything." "Selfish?" Arthur's trembling hand pointed first at Dad, then at Liam. "You think you can treat her like this and lie to everyone? You think I don't know?" Liam shifted uneasily, his usual bravado beginning to crack. "Grandpa, you don't understand the business side of things." "Don't you dare deny it," Arthur snapped, his eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen. He paced across the floor, his cane tapping sharply against the wood. "That debt wasn't from a startup, Liam. I've seen the family account transactions. I saw the withdrawals. It was from gambling in Nevada casinos. It was for that BMW you're driving. It was for trips to Europe and flights to Paris." Mom's head snapped up, her mouth opening, but she was speechless. Dad's face went pale. Arthur turned toward Dad, his voice breaking with disappointment. "I heard you, John. I heard you plotting with Liam to hide the truth, to trick Gianna into paying for his addiction. You threw wine in her face to cover up his lies." He turned his gaze to Danielle, who was twisting her hands in her lap. "And you used your job at the bank to spy on her. You thought you could guilt her into fixing this mess." The accusation lingered, undeniable. Liam shrank back into the sofa, stripped of his charm. Mom covered her face, her shoulders beginning to tremble. "I raised you better than this, Dad," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "Gianna is the only one in this room who's been honest, and you treated her like dirt. She deserves to know the truth." With deliberate fingers, Arthur pulled out his phone. The room froze as he began to dial my number. The bass note swells and then cuts to a rhythmic, pulsing heartbeat, the sound of the truth finally catching up. The call of clarity. The road back to Boise was a dark, blurred ribbon stretching through the Idaho night. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My face was still tacky from the dried red wine, and my wet sweater clung to me like a cold, heavy skin. Beside me, in the passenger seat, Kenshin was restless. The big white Akita kept his head toward me, his soft whines cutting through the sound of the wind against the Vlas. He knew I was breaking. I felt like a fool. I had ditched my friends, Isaac and Craig, and my peaceful camping trip for a family that didn't even see me as a person. I was just a target, a safety net for Liam. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in the center console. I glanced down, expecting an angry text from Mom or a guilt-tripping message from Dad, but the screen lit up with a different name, Arthur. My heart pounded as I pulled over to the shoulder of the highway, the gravel crunching under the tires. I swiped to answer, my voice trembling. "Grandpa?" "Gianna," Arthur said, his voice heavy but steady. "You need to know the truth about what your brother really did. You need to know why they were so desperate." I sat in the silence of the car, Kenshin watching me with intense amber eyes, as Arthur laid it all out. He told me everything he had seen and heard while he sat in that corner.
He told me the $250,000 wasn't for a failed startup. There was no business. It was gambling, Gianna. Nevada casinos, a new BMW, luxury trips to Europe. I saw the family account transactions. I heard your father and Liam scheming before you even arrived. They knew you had the savings, and they planned to trick you into paying for his lifestyle. The air felt like it was sucked out of the car. I closed my eyes, the betrayal cutting deeper than the wine ever could. It wasn't just a mistake or a business failure. It was a heist. My own parents had invited me home to rob me of the security I had spent a decade building. Danielle used her position at the bank, Arthur continued, his voice hardening. They all thought they could manipulate you because you've always been the responsible one. They banked on your guilt. They lied to me, I whispered, my voice cracking. They threw me out for not paying for his gambling? I couldn't let them get away with it, Arthur said firmly. Not after what your father did to you tonight. I told them all off, Gianna. They're sitting in that house right now with nowhere to hide. I thanked him and hung up, staring out at the dark silhouette of the mountains. The anger I felt was no longer hot and chaotic. It was cold and sharp. The clarity was terrifying. My brother wasn't just a golden child who messed up. He was a predator, and my parents were their accomplices. I looked at Kenshin. He let out a low, supportive huff and licked my hand. I shifted the car back into drive. I wasn't the responsible daughter anymore. I was a woman who had just seen her family for who they truly were, and I was done being their solution. When I got back to Boise, I didn't wait for a fake apology. First thing I did, I walked straight into my apartment and wiped the dried wine off my face. That white sweater, the one I'd bought to be presentable for my parents, hit the trash without a second thought. It was a souvenir from a life I didn't want anymore. I sank into my routine. My apartment felt small, but it was mine. I buried myself in work, protecting the $700,000 I'd fought so hard to earn. I started running again, tracing the Boise River in the brisk mornings. Cold air, steady footfalls, it cleared my mind. Kenshin lumbered beside me, his huge white form almost glowing in the dawn. Honestly, for the first time in forever, I felt lighter. No more responsible sister, just me. While I was finding peace, things back in Idaho Falls were kicking off. Arthur wasn't about to play damage control anymore. He was done protecting their reputation. News of that Thanksgiving disaster spread fast. Arthur spilled everything. He called up Aunt Martha and Uncle Stephen and laid out the whole mess. The gambling debts in Nevada, the BMW, the Europe trips. Most importantly, he told them how Mom and Dad tried to trap me into paying for it all. A week passed. My phone buzzed. Aunt Martha was on the line. "Gianna, we heard," she said, her voice soft but steady. "What they did, throwing wine in your face, unforgivable. We're here for you." Then came a text from Uncle Stephen. He usually stays clear of drama, but he wrote, "You don't deserve that treatment. Proud of you for standing up." Their support was solid. It proved not everyone in my blood was out to betray me. Meanwhile, Idaho Falls was falling apart. Liam couldn't dodge the bank forever, and there was nobody left to bail him out. He and Danielle had to sell the mansion, the one they bought just to show off. Aunt Martha said they barely scraped enough to cover the debt. Not exactly a victory lap. The golden child wasn't shining anymore. People started whispering. Liam's charm ran out right when he needed it most. Nobody wanted to hear about real estate deals once they found out the money was lost in casinos. And Mom and Dad, the community they leaned on, began drifting away. Invitations dried up, friends grew cold. Aunt Martha told me Mom tried to sell her misunderstanding story at book club, but not a soul believed her. I sat on my balcony in Boise, watching the sun drop behind the city. Kenshin rested his giant head on my knee. I didn't feel smug. Knowing they were getting what they deserved didn't erase the pain, but it gave me closure. I spent years patching up the messes they made. Now, for once, I only needed to keep myself together, and that was enough. The silence from Idaho Falls finally broke, but not because anyone apologized. It broke with the sound of a door slamming shut. Liam and Danielle had been dodging the truth for as long as they could, but they ran out of options. Without my $250,000 to rescue them, the bank swooped in. The fancy 5-bedroom house they'd love to show off on social media? Gone. Sold at a loss. Someone in the family let it slip that they had to squeeze into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, nothing like the luxury they'd paraded around when they were hitting me up for cash. But honestly, the financial mess wasn't even the worst of it. Danielle lost something even bigger, her reputation. People at the bank found out she'd snooped through my private accounts to stage a family shakedown. In a place like Idaho Falls, you only get one shot at trust. Suddenly, clients started moving their money out. Nobody wants a financial advisor who treats privacy like an optional extra. Liam didn't fare any better. The Golden Boy routine was over. Folks started talking in coffee shops about late-night poker games in Nevada and missing family money. The people who used to think the world of him, they'd seen the truth behind that bright smile. My parents tried to hold on to the perfect family image, but nobody was buying it anymore. Aunt Martha told me Mom still invited people over for her holiday tea, but most made up excuses to avoid the whole thing. Then there's Uncle Stephen. When Dad finally phoned to gripe about Gianna's betrayal, Stephen cut him off. He said, "You threw wine in your daughter's face, John. Call me after you fix that." Meanwhile, back in Boise, I sat in my quiet apartment, city lights gleaming on the glass. Kenshin sprawled across the rug, his white fur soaking up the soft glow of my old lamp. I can't say I felt happy about what happened to my family, but I did feel something settle inside me, a kind of justice. I opened my laptop, my bank account, $700,000. Not just numbers anymore. It was my freedom, my fortress, the barrier no one could push their way through. On my desk sat a photo of us all together, smiling before the lies and the mess. That's when it hit me. The family I'd been missing never existed. I'd been mourning a ghost. I closed the laptop, stood up, and called Kenshin over. Time to get on with our lives. For once, nobody else gets to decide how I do that. The dust kept settling in Idaho Falls, but the silence at my parents' house never let up. No one apologized. No one admitted anything. Just bitter, icy resentment from people who'd simply been caught. I'd already accepted that Mom and Dad weren't going to change, but Arthur wasn't done yet. One rainy Tuesday in Boise, a thick envelope showed up at my door. Not from my parents, from a law firm in Idaho Falls. My heart pounded as I opened it, half expecting another legal threat or some leftover bill from Liam's disaster. Instead, it was a letter from Arthur's lawyer. For years, Arthur had watched from his corner chair while my dad, his own son, turned into a man who prized sweet-talking liars over an honest daughter. He saw them prop up Liam until the whole family started to rot from the inside. That night with the wine, when it splashed across my face, something inside Arthur finally snapped for good. He'd updated his will. There was a deed transfer, too. Dad and Liam were out. The family lake house, the one Liam kept bragging he'd flip for some quick cash, was going into a trust for me. Arthur had tucked in a handwritten note. "I can't fix the past, but I won't bankroll their lies anymore. You earned your life, Gianna. They only ever learned how to spend it. Hold your head high. Kenshin is lucky to have someone as strong as you." I sat there on the floor, surrounded by all those papers, and honestly, I just cried.
Not for the house or the money, but because after 32 years, a man in my family finally saw me and chose to protect what mattered. News hit Idaho Falls like a bolt out of the blue. John called Arthur demanding answers, but Arthur wouldn't pick up. He'd already moved out of the big family place and into a fancy assisted living suite paid for out of his own pocket, far from the fights and all the grasping hands. Liam and Danielle lost it. They'd been counting on that inheritance to claw their way out of the hole Liam's gambling had dug. Now it was gone. No more parachute. They were stuck in that cramped apartment staring at the mess they'd made. I took Kenshin for a walk that night. He must have sensed something had shifted. His tail was high, his eyes bright. We weren't just hanging on anymore. We were moving forward. As I watched the Boise skyline, I realized my parents had tried to drown me in a glass of wine, but really, they'd set me free. Later, I called Arthur. We didn't mention the money. We talked about the weather, my job, how Kenshin was doing. It was what family is supposed to sound like. And as I hung up, it hit me. The so-called golden child was finally out of the spotlight, and I was the one standing in the light. The first winter at the lake house was quiet and beautiful. Kenshin loved the deep Idaho snow, his white fur making him almost invisible against the drifts as he bounded through the yard. I had spent the months turning the house into a sanctuary, new paint, warm rugs, and a massive bookshelf filled with the stories I actually wanted to read. My friends, Isaac and Craig, had visited for New Year's, filling the rooms with real laughter and the smell of wood smoke and cedar. Then, a letter arrived, not a legal document, not a text, but a handwritten envelope from the house in Idaho Falls. I sat by the fireplace, Kenshin's heavy head resting on my knee, and opened it. It was from Mom. "Gianna," it began, the cursive shaky. "Things have been very hard here. Liam and Danielle have moved away to start over, and the house feels far too large and far too quiet. Your father hasn't been the same since Arthur moved out. We made mistakes, Gianna. We were scared for your brother. We want to see you. We want to move past that night. Please come home for Sunday dinner, just once." I read those words, "move past that night," and felt a cold flash of the red wine stinging my eyes all over again. They didn't say, "We're sorry." They didn't say, "We were wrong to lie." Even now, they were centering Liam's failures and their own comfort over the assault they had committed against me. I looked at the fire. A year ago, I would have been halfway to the car, heart racing, hoping this was the moment they finally loved me, but the woman sitting in this lake house wasn't that girl anymore. I picked up a pen and a single sheet of paper. "Mom and Dad," I wrote, "I have moved past that night. I moved past it by building a life where I am respected and safe. I moved past it by realizing that family is a choice, not just a bloodline. I forgive you for your sake, so I don't have to carry the anger anymore, but I will not be coming to dinner. I am already home." I didn't sign it, "Your daughter." I just signed it, "Gianna." I walked to the end of the driveway and put the flag up on the mailbox. I looked at the frozen lake and the towering pines. I had $700,000 in the bank, a house that belonged to me, and a loyal protector in Kenshin. But more than that, I had the one thing Liam and my parents would never understand. I had peace. The story of the golden child was over. My story was just beginning.